You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Come in store and you'll also get a 10-day sample of Double Wear Longwear Foundation in your perfect shade. Quantities are limited, so don't miss the Estee Lauder free gift. Now through August 23rd at Dillard's and Dillards.com.
Sometimes we need to slow down and remember the simple pleasures in life. Good coffee, good books, and good company. Come on in. Take a seat. The coffee's just been brewed. Let's see who we have in the coffee shop today. What a wonderful day in the coffee shop. Now you guys, if you're regular listeners, you know I'm looking for a book. A book on a table. Book. Where's the book? Megge of Bury Down. Wow. And the name on the book is Rebecca Kightlinger. How are you doing today, Rebecca?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I love having guests in the coffee shop.
And I love coffee shops.
Great fit. Most writers do.
Yep.
Tell me about Megge of Bury Down.
Well, Megge of Bury Down is set in 13th-century Cornwall, and it's set in a rural area called Bury Down. There's a place in Cornwall called Bury Down. And Megge is a young girl. She's the daughter of a midwife, and she's expected to inherit this ancient book. It's a grimoire, a book of spells and incantations that's been passed down through centuries to her mother. And then she's expected to become her mother's apprentice. And the book opens with Megge about to go to her ceremony, her induction ceremony, being taken into the family as a woman of Bury Down. She's still a child. And they spend the night in Bury Down Circle, which is where their sacred grove is located. And then as the sun comes up, she's expected to go through this ceremony and accept her mother's book. But when she sees it, she'd never seen it before, and she sees it and she feels like she knows it. She recognizes it. She sees these symbols that are carved into the cover of this book. And she feels like it's like she's hearing her name being called as she sees these symbols. And she feels like she's known this book all her life, and she feels this yearning to take it. And she reaches out for the book, and as she lays her hand on it, it burns her fingertips, and she hears this voice whisper, "Murderer." And she pulls her hand back, and she refuses the book, and she refuses her inheritance and refuses to become her mother's apprentice. And so the story of this part of the Bury Down Chronicles is that the story of Megge's family trying to get her to accept her destiny and find the courage to take on this book and become her mother's apprentice.
Oh, wow. That just sounds absolutely intense and insane. How old is Megge when all this is going on?
She has just turned 6. The women of Bury Down are expected to take up their mother's book and become their mother's apprentice at the age of 6. And the reason for this, as Megge learns much later, is that there is so much to learn, and there are all these symbols in these books that they have to be taught. See, there are 2 books, and one of them is called the Book of Time, and her cousin inherits that, and that's the Seer's book. This is a book of celestial symbols and celestial wisdom. This is the book for the seers of Bury Down. There's a second book that's come down through the ages called the Book of Seasons, and this is the book of knowledge of the physical world, of healing, of growing things, of even things like stonemasonry, all the things of the earth. And this is the book that Megge's supposed to inherit. And there are symbols in these books that are only defined in the other book. And so throughout centuries, these 2 books have come down in time separately through different families being inherited by different people, because the power that's unleashed in these books when they come together in the hands of one person is enormous. And so in order to protect this power, the books have been separated, and they were separated since the 4th century. And now they're supposed to come together in the hands of either Megge or her cousin. And this fear of Megge's is keeping them apart.
Wow. And for a 6-year-old to be called a murderer, that's a pretty intense label for a young child.
It's terrifying to her. And the problem is that she's afraid, she becomes afraid, once she thinks about this, she becomes afraid that by taking up this book, she's going to hurt the people she loves. And the irony is that her mother, the same night that Megge takes her vow, her mother takes a vow to face flames rather than fail to pass this book on to Megge. So by refusing to take up the book, she's actually putting her mother and her whole family in more jeopardy. But they can't tell her all this. You know, they don't want to make her any more afraid. They don't want to put any more pressure on her. And they really can't tell her what this is all about. She's supposed to just accept it and begin to learn about it and learn all this stuff as she goes along. But she's kind of thrown a wrench in all those gears.
Sounds like quite the incredible adventure. It really does.
It felt that way, you know, going through the story. It felt that way to me.
Now, how long did it take you to write this book and come up with this incredible plot?
Well, it's taken me about 7 years from the time I started. The problem is that I really can't take credit for coming up with this plot. I have this way of writing stories in that I sit down at my typewriter. I work at a manual typewriter for my first draft, and I just clear my mind and wait for an image to come or for a narrator to show up or for a story to just somehow start. And then I just listen and I watch and I describe things on paper as they play out. For none of them really do I actually come up with an idea and think, now I got to come up with characters and plot lines. The stories just keep coming and they unroll on their own and new characters show up fully formed. I know exactly what they look like, what their voices sound like, what their names are, what their backstory is in a lot of cases. And it all just somehow fits together for the first draft. And then I go back and I do revising. I do research along the way too, especially in a book like this, to make sure that the facts are as close to reality as I can get them. But I think that's why it takes so long.
What was the hardest fact you had to research?
The church, the history of the church in medieval England. When I first started writing it, I didn't really worry that much about it because Megge and her family aren't Christian. They're not really pagans either. They just are students of these books. They're healers and they're seers, but they don't worship other gods really other than just knowledge and wisdom. And the motto of this whole series is knowledge wedded to wisdom is power. And the book of seasons is the book of knowledge, and the book of time is the book of wisdom. And so put together, they're very powerful. And this is really the only religion they have. And I had written this story. I had it kind of fleshed out a little bit, but I knew I wasn't anywhere near done with it. I didn't have the world that I needed to set this story in. So I decided to go to Cornwall. And I met this woman when I was starting to look into the church to see what the situation was. And so I heard about this woman who knew all about the medieval church. And she came over and she got me when I arrived at the bed and breakfast I was staying at in Cornwall. And she took me back to her manor. She's in her 80s, wonderful woman, very knowledgeable. And the first thing she said was, if you haven't included the church, you've missed the whole point. And so that was when I first started really researching the church in medieval England, and I'm still at it. It's incredibly complicated.
Sounds like a fantastic adventure.
It has been. It has been.
How many trips to Cornwall have you made?
I made one, and that was back in the summer of 2013. And I was there for a week, and it wasn't enough. I wish I could have stayed longer. But the people I met while I was there were so helpful. They taught me so much about the past and about locations that I was trying to use in Cornwall, and took me all over. They took me to this castle that plays a major part in the story, and we drove these distances between Bury Down Hill Fort and Restormel Castle, and even out to Tintagel, so I could get a feel for what the terrain was like and how they could have possibly made these journeys. And so I ended up using some fictional license, I guess you'd have to say, in making places in the book seem closer than they are in the real world. But the whole story is based on real places and real historical structures, even though there are some changes that make the story itself work.
Well, I think every author takes a bit of literary license. I don't know one that doesn't.
Yeah, well, especially since this isn't about any historical person or a saint or anything like this. It does include some people from history, Earl Richard and Earl Edmund of Cornwall. But otherwise, it's pretty loose historically.
Now, they say editing is slaying your darling. What is the one thing you had to take out of the book that you wish you hadn't?
Oh, golly. I didn't really have to lose anything important. When I started writing Megge, I realized that I didn't know enough about writing novels to be able to write this story well. And so that was when I enrolled in a low residency Masters of Fine Arts program at Stone Coast. And that was when I learned some things that you really have to take out of things, which one of these things is names. You know, there are people who show up in stories who they're a nice image, but they're not important enough to bother the reader with a name. And so there were a couple of minor characters who I really liked. I thought they were charming, and I had to kind of make them anonymous. And one little girl I actually had to take out, even though she really didn't play a big part, and taking her out really didn't do anything to harm the story, but I kind of miss her. So that would be about the only thing I can think of. Most of the things that my narrator, Megge, revealed through the story ended up needing to be there. And things that I thought I could take out, I realized down the road needed to be there. So I had to put them back in order to make the rest of the story work. And I realized after doing that especially for the first draft, even if something doesn't seem to make much sense based on what I know from the foregoing, I keep it in just because down the road, that person's going to pop up again. And so I try not to fall too much in love with them so they become a darling. And if they have to come out, they would, but I haven't had to take that many things out.
That's great. That really is. Now, when you were in Cornwall, you said you met all these amazing people. Did any of them manage to make their way into your manuscript?
No, nobody I know is in the story. But boy, they were a great help. A lot of the things they taught me made their way into the story. For example, I was talking about these people who would pick up brambles and sticks and take them home and burn them. And the historian I was working with said, whoa, wait a minute. They wouldn't do that back then because everything belonged to the Earl of Cornwall. So you wouldn't just go into his woods and even pick up dead wood and take it home. And so that kind of detail made it into the book. But there's nobody in the book that's based on anybody I know. All these characters come to me through the narrator, and they feel very real to me, and sometimes they remind me of people, but I can't think of anybody I've based anybody on.
Well, that's great that your characters just come to you so fully formed. So
it is. It's wonderful. I love it.
I'm guessing that you don't plot out your manuscripts in advance, that you just kind of let your characters run away with it?
Pretty much. I do query, I call it querying a manuscript. For instance, if there's a scene that doesn't seem realistic, or that you think, I'm not sure that would that really happen that way, or how would this person react? Sometimes a beta reader will say, why wouldn't he do this? And so, for instance, there's a scene in the story where Megge's mother is taking care of this young boy who was shot in the leg with an arrow. And one of my readers said, well, wait a minute, she's going to do this thing. Why wouldn't the father object? Or why wouldn't he say something, because this is such an unusual treatment she's doing? And so I looked at the scene again and I thought, well, what would he ask? And then I just kind of sit back and see how it plays out. And a lot of times things happen differently than if I were to have just meddled and tried to explain something. And I see very clearly how these characters react. And it's almost as though the scene opens up. It expands either spatially or temporally to include another moment that maybe I didn't catch the first time I was sort of living in the scene. But sometimes I try to plot things out. A lot of times when I'm swimming, I swim laps a few times a week. And a lot of times when I'm swimming, I try to come up with ways of solving questions that I have about a plot, or how are they going to catch this guy, or what are they going to do to this guy? And I try to plot out these ideas in my head. But then I sit down at the typewriter to type it up, and it ends up Megge just continues on with her story. It's very different from anything I ever would have come up with, and it's always better.
Now, because your book is set in medieval times, do you have to research things like herbs and plants that would have been around at that time, or for medicinal uses or things like that?
Yes, I've got all kinds of books and even DVDs on medieval times. And there's a company called the Great Courses, and they have a couple of wonderful lectures on the Middle Ages. And so I've watched those. And everything that I put in, I have to look up. And first of all, especially the herbal medicine, I'm a physician, but I never really did anything with herbal medicine, but I have a respect for it. And I respect people who know how to use it. I just never was able to work that into my life. So I do look that up, and then I have to see if it could have been found in Cornwall. And again, one of the things that happens when I'm watching these scenes play out is that I'll hear the name of a flower or an herb, and it might be something that I've never even heard of. Colt's foot was one. And I thought, what the heck is that? And I wrote it down, and then I just kept going with the scene, and then I went and looked it up, and there it was. You know, it was an herb that they would use. So there are a lot of unusual things like that, things that I see in the scene that I have to go look up, and I find, yeah, that was a thing.
That's great. That's great. Like I said, I'm not a writer myself, but I consider myself a friend to many writers and authors.
Uh-huh.
And I have one that actually I know she keeps, because she writes, as she calls it, sword and sorcery fantasy. She actually keeps a book, I think it's Potter's Herbal Encyclopedia, hanging around on her bookshelf.
Oh, yeah. I've got all kinds of books like that, mainly because I don't like to just look things up online and try to remember them from that, or I do use a lot of websites, but I like the books. I like to be able to get the detail of them. So I've got probably a quarter of my library is filled with research books related to this era, because I know that I'm going to end up needing to look things up again, or to confirm things, or to get more detailed information, or even correct errors that I may have made before. And so I try to keep my mind open and not fit misconceptions into history, but I try to make sure I've got things right. And if I haven't, then I need to find a way to correct them. But boy, the research is great. I've always been kind of I don't want to say a researcher, a scholar or something, but just a curious person and liking to look things up and understand them better. So this to me has just been like a feast every day.
That's great. I always love books where not only do you get to go on a great adventure or a great story experienced, you learn just a little bit of knowledge along the way. I think those are the best ones. Now,
those are fun, that's for sure.
I will say, I'll read anything if it sits in front of me long enough, including the cereal box.
Yeah, me too. There's some things I probably would not do too much. I don't read a lot of straight ahead fantasy, only because I just don't understand a lot of it. I tend to be pretty well grounded in, this time and place and in things that can be researched. And when they get too far out there, people flying around and stuff like that, I kind of have to put those things down. I don't know, I find them a little bit disturbing. I don't know why.
Well, we all have our favorite genres and our favorite things. So.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure.
And unfortunately, I'm such a voracious reader. I'll read the fantasy, then I'll read a thriller, then I'll read a actual factual history book. And then I'll turn around and I'll read the newspaper because it was there. I mean, if it sits in front of me long enough, I'm reading it. It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah, I think I probably would do that too.
So what's your favorite genre to read when you're not writing?
I like to read cop stories, detective stories, thrillers, spies. Oh, I love spies. And I do a lot of reading for the Historical Novel Society, and I've found myself really drawn toward books about World War II. And I don't know why, because I've never really studied the history of that time. But boy, I've been finding it so fascinating lately, and I've read some great novels by people who really seem to have the history down, and they're very personal novels. They're stories about people's lives going through these things, and that's been a great pleasure for me to be able to read those things and learn something about that history.
That's fascinating because I've recently found myself reading and watching a lot of World War II documentaries and reading World War II history. And one thing, if you ever get the chance, and they are a dying breed, talk to a couple of World War II veterans.
Yeah, my dad was one, and he never talked about it much. Sometimes it's hard to get them to talk about it. He was at Normandy. I think he said it was day 2 or day 3 at Normandy. And he still has a hard time talking about it. We have some pictures of him in Europe. He was this tall, skinny boy, sitting at a table at an outdoor bistro kind of place with a glass of wine. He, with his cap cocked on his head a little bit, and just looking like the American in Europe. But I know he saw things that he just couldn't talk about.
Best advice, you want to get a warrior to talk. Give them another warrior, even if it's a modern-day soldier, to talk to. They'll open up because it's become soldier to soldier. Mm-hmm. That's the easy way to get one soldier to talk. Get them another one to talk to.
Well, that's not a bad idea. I have a niece who's a soldier. She's a captain in the Army, and she hasn't seen action outside of the U.S. or inside. She's been stationed here in the U.S., but she would probably be a good person to be able to talk to people about that.
Like I said, that's the best advice I can ever give anybody who's always saying, well, so-and-so was in this, and I'd love to hear their stories, but they just won't talk to me. Get them. Right. When you want to get a warrior to talk, get them another warrior to talk to. Now, your father might be more willing to open up to a male just because he's also male. But he's passed away, but he did talk to my husband some about it, and David really enjoyed talking to him about it. But again, he didn't reveal a lot.
I remember when I was a kid looking at his artifacts from the war, things he brought home, and he actually had a photograph of Hitler that he took off of a dead German soldier when they were, I don't know what they were doing, but that kind of thing, that's what he brought home. But even then, he was pretty tight-lipped about everything.
Well, like I said, for anybody else out there that's in your situation, that's the best advice I can give.
Okay, well, that's a good idea. That's a real good idea.
It seems to work. It really does. And then you can just sit there in the corner and be the fly on the wall and just let the two of them talk.
Yeah.
And the stories, I've seen it work more than a dozen times. So, as I'm part of the military community, so I've had the luxury of always going, so-and-so won't talk. They live here. Mm-hmm. Who do we know that lives over in that area that could make the trip?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense because they know the language of war or of that type of work. And for instance, I know as a physician, I know that I would probably be able to talk about my previous career as a doctor with another doctor because they would understand. They would know what to ask. They would know how to respond. And they would probably, be able to elicit the type of responses that would mean something, because it's hard to talk to somebody who hasn't been there. And I can't imagine how hard it would be to talk to somebody about war experience who hadn't been through it.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on your adventures and in all your time writing this manuscript, what was the one thing that one of your characters did that just absolutely surprised you? Like, I did not see that coming. One thing that you're just like, I don't believe this.
Well, I think it would have to be, let me think about that. Can't really think of anything shocking that any of my characters did. Well, there was one surprise when, this is early on in the book, and this isn't a spoiler or anything like that. But when Megge is going to the village, Megge and her younger cousin, Brigida, who's 6 months younger than her, and Megge's mother and her Aunt Clarice and her great-aunt Elidis and Morwen, who is Megge's elderly companion. She's sort of a great-aunt or a great-grandmother figure. They're all going into town. They're walking through these pastures and across this little creek and everything. And Megge and her mother are at odds because Megge's mother wants her to do this, and Megge won't do it. She won't take up that book. Brigida, on the other hand, one of the recent reviewers described her as the golden child. Brigida is so good. Everybody loves Brigida. She's beautiful. She's smart. She is obedient. She's taken up her mother's book, and she's become her mother's apprentice seer. Well, they're all going into town, and they're all dressed up, and Megge stops, and she picks up this little turtle to keep him from getting hurt, and he rolls down the front of her dress, and she gets this little black line of muck down the front of her dress, and she tries to clean it up, and she wipes it, and it just becomes this black smear. And her mother's already kind of irritated with her, and then Megge starts sneezing, and she sneezes on her hand, and her mother gets even madder. And she looks at her, and she says, "Here, use this cloth. Blow your nose. Use the cloth." And then she turns to Megge's aunt and says, "Can this really be my daughter?" I didn't see that coming, and neither did Megge. I mean, she was floored, and I was floored, and I thought, "Oh my God, how bad is this woman?" So that was kind of a surprise coming from Megge's mother.
Well, that's great. See, that's the kind of things that just pop up that I think make the book so fascinating.
Oh, it was. You can just see poor little Megge standing there. She just stops, and she's just, really. It was a sad moment for me. It hurt me, for her.
So you get really invested in your characters.
Oh, yeah. I love them. Because they let me know them. It's not like I'm sitting down and saying, okay, this one's going to be this way, this one's going to be that way. I just see what they do. I see how they behave, and I see the bonds they have or they don't have. And I can feel the friction between them. And some of them, obviously in any book, some people die and some people are harmed. And when that happens with a lot of them, I think, oh no, like I'll be in the middle of a scene and I'll think, oh no, I think I know what's about to happen. Oh God, please don't let this happen. And it happens. And I think, oh God, it happened. And some of the characters, it makes me sad when things happen to them. Other times I think, oh yeah, oh good, I'm glad this is happening to this one. So yeah, you do kind of get to know them.
I do have to ask, you say you do your first draft on a manual typewriter.
Yeah.
What's the story behind the manual typewriter?
Well, this was years ago. This was a long time ago. For some reason, I decided I wanted a manual typewriter. And I don't know why. My husband bought me one, though. And I sat down at it. I put the paper in. I remember it was 8 o'clock one night. It was the winter time. And this is when I was still in practice. But it was a quiet evening. I sat and I thought, okay, who has the story? I didn't know how to write a story. I mean, I had written medical papers. I'd written all kinds of stuff, but I had never written a story. And I closed my eyes and I sat back and I swear all these people just started showing up. I felt like I was seeing like a picnic or something in this green area and like a gazebo. And all these people dressed in work clothes or farmers' clothes, they looked like maybe they were from the 1930s. They were all kind of jostling around like they all wanted to tell this story, and they couldn't decide amongst them who was going to tell the story. And this old woman steps through, and she's wearing kind of a grayish, lavenderish flower dress, and she says, I'll tell it. And she says, I was once a girl. And off she goes, and she started telling the story. And I just started writing what she said and writing what I saw. And every night at 8 o'clock, I'd sit down, and she would tell me, she would either show me another scene or tell me another part of the story. And eventually, these other narrators started popping in, and they'd say, whoa, wait a minute, that didn't happen. Because what happened was they had all been part of this terrible experience that this town went through. And back in the 30s, they didn't have the internet. They didn't have a lot of ways of knowing what other people were going through. So all these people were going through this terrible time, and they could see what was happening to them, and they could see what was happening to the town, but nobody had the whole story. And I felt like it was all these people coming back, trying to reconcile what the heck did we live through. And at the end, they all knew, and I knew what they had lived through. And that was my first novel. But I wasn't a good enough writer then, and I'm probably still not a good enough writer to be able to put it into novel form. But I hope to, because I think it's a good story. It's about the formation of the Steelworkers Union in a small town in somewhere either in Pennsylvania or New York State. I don't imagine this ever happened. I don't know if it ever happened, but just like with Megge and her town, I did a ton of research. I went to these small steel towns. I tried to look in, see if any of this stuff possibly could have happened, and there it was. But once that story was done, those narrators were gone, never heard from them again. And then I started writing another story, and I just kept at it the same way. What I would do is sit down at the typewriter every night and type out these scenes, and then I would type them into my computer the same way they came off the manual typewriter, and then put them together based on that. But for some reason, the manual typewriter, I don't know if it slows down my thinking or just makes it more palpable or something. I don't know, but it really works. Now I've had a bad injury to my right hand, so I can't type so much with my right hand, and so I started dictating into the computer, and I got this Dragon Naturally Speaking voice recognition system. So I can pretty well type on the manual typewriter with my left hand, and I do most of it with my left hand, and then I dictate it into the computer and I work on it that way. But I don't know why. For some reason, it's when I sit down at the manual typewriter that I get the clearest image of my narrators and the scenes they're trying to show me.
Well, that is a fantastic tale. Now we have come to the time where we are got to pay those radio station bills.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, it's that time, so I'm going to pour you a fresh cup of coffee.
Well, that sounds good.
And we will see everybody on the other side.
Most writers and radio show hosts know that to connect with your fans, you need to do more than just write books or record the latest podcasts. There are many different elements that go into forming an online platform, but there are also many hidden traps. To make matters worse, solid advice on how to survive the muddy waters is scarce. In the book Hidden Traps, I talk about some of the important issues of working with an online platform, highlighting traps that could put your physical or internet security at risk or be harmful to your reputation. Are your social media posts just links with a few disjointed words, making you look like someone who can't complete a sentence? Did your new website cost you more than you anticipated? Are you leaking your personal contact details across the web without even knowing it? Then you need Hidden Traps. Hidden Traps is now available in paperback and ebook from a variety of retailers, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Kobo. Visit blackwolfpublications.com for more details.
If you're 85 or younger, would you like peace of mind and comfort for your family? We're Final Expense Direct with an urgent message for you. The average funeral today costs over $8,000, but the most you'll get from government benefits is $255. How will your family pay the difference? We can help. Our senior plans start as low as just $1 a day and pay up to $30,000 for a funeral and other final expenses. Peace of mind is easy. There's no medical exam. You'll have lifetime coverage, and your plan can't be canceled as long as you pay your premiums. Call now for free information about our senior plans. Answer a few simple questions and receive approval right on the phone. Plus, call right now and we'll give you a discount prescription card for free. Call 800-553-8687. That's 800-553-8687. Again, 800-553-8687.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
Everyone loves liberty. Our rights come from God, not the government. So why are you letting other people tell you what's best for your healthcare? Exercise your freedom with Liberty Health Share. Liberty Health Share is a community of people who voluntarily share one another's medical costs. Liberty Health Share is founded on the idea that most people truly want to help one another. Healthcare sharing allows members to do just that as a true community that supports one another in times of need. Liberty believes people should make decisions for themselves and their families. Members are able to take back the freedom to make their own decisions about their healthcare. Freedom from guilt or doubt about how your money is used. You have the freedom to direct your healthcare, not to be dictated to by bureaucrats. Stop letting others tell you what to do and join a community of like-minded people. Exercise your freedom. Join Liberty Health Share and take back the control of your healthcare while helping those around you. Call Liberty at 855-58-LIBERTY. Again, that's 855-58-LIBERTY for more information, or you can check them out at libertyhealthshare.org. Again, that's libertyhealthshare.org.
Sometimes writers feel lost, unsure why a passage may not be working. It takes another set of eyes to help us nurture our writing into full maturity. At Black Wolf Editorial Services, we strive to enable writers to develop and grow, offering manuscript critiques and line edits through a mentoring editorial style. We also offer assistance on generating a writer's bio for your websites. Black Wolf Editorial Services, nurturing your writing into maturity. For a full list of services, visit blackwolfeditorial.com.
Thank y'all for hanging in there with us while we paid those radio station bills. And Rebecca Kightlinger is still with us. Now, Rebecca, how did you get this fantastic cover?
Well, I wish I could say that I had something to do with it, but I had no input into it. It was designed by a cover artist named April Martinez, and she was recommended by the publisher. And, as somebody who tends to be kind of a hands-on control freak, I wanted to make suggestions. I wanted to say, well, what about this? What about this? And I want this, and I don't want that. But I found this article about authors and covers, and they said that authors absolutely should just keep their mouths shut when it comes to the cover. And they were absolutely right, because April read the book and she replicated the cover of the Book of Seasons on Megge's book, Megge of Berrydown. And the Book of Seasons was this ancient book that had this heavy oaken cover with these brass hinges on the side and these leather thongs going through the back to hold the pages in. And the way that they would add a new page of vellum or parchment is that they would untie those laces and put the parchment in, put the cover back on top, and then tie the laces. But the cover also had these symbols etched into it. And one was a symbol of a quarter moon. One was a constellation. And another one was an image of a woman who happened to be the goddess Atropos, and she figures in this story way down the line. But what April did was she put these images on this cover, not as scratches or carvings, but as beautiful drawings, and then she put Atropos' face on there. And a lot of people might think that the girl on the cover is Megge, but it's not. It's a rendering of one of the images in the book that Megge's supposed to inherit. And I think she did a beautiful job on it. I never saw this coming. I never would have dreamed of doing it this way. And I never saw the cover until it was done and it was posted online. That was the first time I saw it.
Well, I must say, it's very fantastic. It's beautiful and it's eye-catching.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, April also did the book trailer. And I think she did a very nice job on that, too. She's quite an artist and has a great eye for concepts.
Well, I have a feeling she'll be doing more book covers for you.
Oh, yeah. I hope she never stops.
Now, what made you go with a small traditional publisher?
Well, I looked at different ways of doing this, and I wasn't sure where to send it. I sent it to, a lot of different agents and places along the way. And at one point, I thought, well, maybe I'll just do this myself. Maybe I'll just self-publish. And then I started looking into it, and I thought, I can't learn all this stuff. You need a professional for this. And so I decided to just wait and see who would come along and how this would play out. And I was actually talking to a woman who was a cover artist, and she said, boy, this book sounds like something that one of the publishers I work with would really like. Why don't you send it to her? And so I did. I sent it to Zumaya Publications, and she was right. Liz Burton really liked it. And that's how that came about. And it's been a great experience working with her, because I'm able to work with the publisher, who is also the main editor, and she's got a great eye, and she's found ways of taking out just a word or two here and there, and all of a sudden the sentence just comes to life. So she's a wonderful editor, and she's been great to work with. So this is probably about the level that I really like. I have some control, but it's not in my hands. I'm not going to be able to mess it up. She knows exactly what she's doing. So, and it's not so big that you feel like you're lost in the shuffle. So this is just right for me.
Well, that's fantastic that you've kind of found your home in the publishing world, because I've heard it's a very large, very intense industry in many aspects.
It is, and a lot of times with just about everything I've learned in life is that sometimes you just have to wait and see who shows up in your life. And very often, if you don't grab at the first thing that comes along, or if you don't try to force things, you just sit back and you keep doing your work and you try to do it the best way you can, the right person will show up when they're ready and when the time's right. And that's exactly what's happened all along the way here with this. If I hadn't gone with Zumaya, I never would have gotten April to do this cover, and everything's fallen into place. It's just a matter of timing and being patient.
Now, we had discussed audiobooks off air. Any plans to make your book into an audiobook?
Oh, I want to. And in fact, I have, I've listed it with, ACX, the Audible exchange. So I'm waiting for the right narrator now to find this and to contact me and say, I want to narrate that book. And again, I'm not pushing it. It's out there, and I've kind of listed the qualities that I would like to see in it, but I'm just going to see who decides that this book is right for them to narrate.
It's fantastic that you have so much patience. I've seen so many people try and rush the process.
That never has worked for me. It never has, and that's one thing that over time, it's almost like you have your own little metronome going in there, and some people's theirs is going, and mine just goes kind of. So things happen when they're supposed to happen, and that's just all there is to it.
I think it's wonderful. So you've got so many stories inside you. What is you're working on book 2. I've got to ask where in the process you are. Have you finished that manual typewriter first draft?
Not yet, because I keep thinking I have, but then I sit down and more detail comes out. I think I've probably got enough right now for books 2 and 3. And there's one spot in there where I think I can make the transition, and I'll probably have the drafts for the next 2 books. And I'm going to be going back to Cornwall in September. And my problem with it now is that I can kind of see where it's going, and I hate to stop the first draft process in order to go back and start revising. So what I'm going to do is split my day up, and in the morning I'll indulge myself by sitting down at the typewriter and keeping the story moving. And then in the afternoon or evening, I'll dictate it into the computer and then start revising. Got to do it eventually. So that's where I'm at with it now. But it's moving fast.
Oh, that is fantastic.
It feels good. It feels good.
I do have to ask, what is your favorite coffee shop treat?
Well, alongside a nice cup of dark roast coffee with 2 creams and 1 sugar, then I would say a good scone. Not too crispy on the outside, but nice and sweet. Maybe blueberry scones are really good.
Oh, a woman after my own heart. I love blueberry scones. It's hard to find a good one, though.
Well, I'm hoping to find some really good ones when I go to Cornwall next time, too.
I think you'll be in the perfect place to find them.
I think so.
So while you're writing and all these characters are flooding, do you ever just get so lost in the process that you look up and don't realize how much time has passed?
That happens all the time. And usually with the first draft, as I'm revising too, I mean, I am there in the story, and anything could be going on around me, and I might not notice. I tend to choose times when I know everything's going to be quiet, everything's going to be peaceful in the house, and I can just drift away into the story. If I'm interrupted, I feel like I really have to pull myself back into the library and into this century, really, because it's so real when I'm there, when I'm in those scenes.
Well, I think the fact that you're able to get so deep into the scenes and so deep into the manuscript brings the words on the page to life that much more for your readers.
I hope so. And one thing that people tend to remark on is that they feel like they're there. They sit down and they open the book. They don't know what to expect. They start reading, and they can't put it down. They feel like they're right there with the characters. And that, to me, is the greatest experience. That's what I want readers to experience. I want them to be able to escape without it being escapist fluff. I want them to feel like they're in another world, not out of this world, because it's definitely set in the real world, but I just want them to feel like they're in another place, another time, and yet they understand what these characters are going through. I think the things that Megge's facing and the pressure and the frustration her poor mother's going through, trying to get her to be a good girl and obey, and Megge's saying, "I can't. I'm afraid. What are you afraid of?" And I think people can resonate with that, and I think that they feel enough that they're in that world that it just doesn't feel like another thing that's happening now, and that seems to be what people are saying that they like most about it.
It's always fun to lose yourself in the pages of a good book. So how many adventures can we expect from Megge?
Well, one thing I can say about the next book is that Megge meets new people, and she is the next part of the next book is set out on Cornwall's northern coast, on the cliffs of Cornwall, and so there's, oh my God, the stuff that happens out there you just won't believe. I couldn't believe it. So I mean, she shows me clearly enough, and it all makes sense. But boy, so there are some adventures coming up, and we still have to deal with the blacksmith. So he's still a problem. Oh
boy, there's a blacksmith in there too. Awesome.
Oh yeah. There's a blacksmith, yeah. Oh, and Tinker. Tinker is so bad. So, yes, but we learn more about these people, and, you know, I think people will want to follow their stories. I do. I want to see what happens to them.
Well, isn't that the goal of every author, to get people to fall in love with their customers, fall in love with their characters and want to go on another adventure and another adventure?
Yeah, and I hope they enjoy it. I hope they enjoy the ride as much as I do, and that's what I'm going for. To follow the story as honestly as possible and as vividly as possible, and to spare people boring parts, and to just give them something they can cruise through and enjoy and wonder about between sequels.
Kind of like sitting by the fireplace with a book in your hand, just reading and being whisked away.
That's my favorite thing.
Now, is there any character, maybe a minor character or something, that just seems to crop up that he seems to be the fickle, you love to hate him?
Oh, well, there are two of those at least. One of them, he's so bad. He is so bad. But his name is Tinker, and he's a very bad guy. But I think there's more to him than we know, and I'm starting to catch glimmers of it as I go through the next story. I mean, I get to know these people just like everybody else does, and nobody can be quite as bad as Tinker is without having some kind of a reason for it somewhere inside. And I'm starting to get to the bottom of Tinker and to see other sides of him. But he's one that intrigues me. So we'll see what he gets up to next time.
Well, it sounds absolutely fantastic. Now, is there anything you wanted to bring up that I haven't mentioned?
Well, you're such a good interviewer. You've asked everything I can think of that pertains to the book. So I can't really think of any other questions that would need to be answered. You've really gone through all of them.
Well, I do have one more question.
Okay.
If readers want to find out more about you, what is your social media contact information?
Oh, that's one thing. The Bury Down Chronicles website has a lot of information about the real locations, and it also has a list of all the characters and how to pronounce their names and how they're related to each other. So that's Bury Down Chronicles, one word, BURYDOWNCHRONICLES.com. And there's also an author website, RebeccaKightlinger.com, and that's KIGHTLINGER. And those two websites link to each other too. But you can learn a lot about the history of Bury Down itself on the Bury Down Chronicles website. Like I said, Bury Down exists. It was a hill fort in the Neolithic era, thousands of years ago, and now it's just a low stone ring, as Morwen describes it, a low stone crown set crooked on a great green head. So it's a stone ring set on the top of a hill. It's a little bit off center. If you have a minute, you asked me if there was a question that readers might be interested in about the story. Do you have time for me to tell it?
Of course.
Okay. when I went to Cornwall to see where this story was set, I mean, I had never been there. I really didn't know much about the place. All I saw was what Megge showed me as she narrated and in scenes. And I knew when she first started talking, I had no idea where she was, frankly. She just appeared to me as this young woman dressed in these heavy woolens, sitting on a big boulder on top of this really windy hill. And at the time, I was finishing another novel, which I think is going to be toward the end of this series. And she said, when you're done with those Dutch people, I want to go next. Because the other story was set in Holland. And I said, okay. And I finished that story, and I came back to Megge, and she just started telling me her story, but she wouldn't tell me where she was or when it was. And so I had to go by all these clues, these things I was seeing to figure out where it was. Well, I figured out that it was Cornwall, and I figured out kind of where it was based on this castle and this river, which turned out to be the River Foy. And so I thought, well, I had better go there just to see if I'm getting any of this right or if it's anything like I've imagined. So I went to Google Earth, and I figured out where this was, and I found a bed and breakfast that I thought was really pretty close to where Megge was talking about. And at this time, all she had told me about her herder's hill was that there was an oak grove at the top of it that was their sacred healer's grove. This is where women would come at night with torches to come for midnight healings by her mother and her aunt. And this was at the top of her hill where she would sit on the other side and herd sheep. Anyway, I got there. It's called Baudelet. It's this beautiful B&B, and that's all I knew about it. And I arrived at night. And as I was driving up it's way out in the middle of nowhere. As we're going up this stone driveway, this owl comes swooping out of the branches and over the car. And I thought, wow, look at this. And I walked into this old house, and the kitchen, I swear, was set up just like Megge's, with a stone floor, with a huge hearth, and they even had a drying rack, a wooden rack over the table. Now, this house was built in the 1800s, so it wasn't there when Megge was there, but I was just so blown away, and I had this funny feeling, and I looked out the window, and I asked the lady, I said, if I were to look out that window, would I see a high, gently sloping hill? She said, yeah. And I said, would sheep have ever grazed on that hill? And she said, they've always grazed sheep on that hill, and we still do. And I thought, geez, that sounds, so it was amazing. I was starting to get these chills. And she said, and at the top of that hill is an ancient stone circle. And that was when she told me about Berrydown. And so that was when I started realizing that there's more to this place than I realized, and more to this story. And it turns out that feels very much like the place that Megge was describing. And there's even a house on that structure, or on that land, that was there when William the Conqueror was there. It's on the Doomsday Survey of 1086. So it would have been there in Megge's day. So not a lot has changed in that area. And I've got the history of it written by the people who live there now, and that's on the website as well if people want to learn a little more about it.
That is fantastic, and I personally can't wait to go on an adventure with Megge. Now, any last thoughts?
Only that I hope that people enjoy the book, and I hope they enjoy Megge's story, and that it resonates with something in their lives or something that they just intuitively know, and that they'll want to follow along, and that they'll get some real pleasure and joy out of reading it.
Oh, I'm pretty sure they will. Now,
Thanks.
We have come to my favorite part of the show.
Okay.
And this is where I thank you for being such a fantastic guest, Rebecca. And
I thank you for being such a wonderful host.
Oh, I love having guests in the coffee shop. So
I can tell.
For anybody wanting to track me down, you can find me on Twitter at Radio Host Jessie, and of course there's the website Jessie's Coffee Shop. Now, I get to pour myself a fresh cup of coffee, and I'm going to snatch up Megge of Berrydown and settle in with a great book, and I will see you folks next time in the coffee shop.